Hello and welcome. I'm Elaine Canyon, sweetly writing happily ever after, one book at a time. And in this video, we're building your cover design toolbox. It is finished. The ebook cover for my debut novella, Love, Ships, and Sea Serpents, is finished, and I am so excited. So what I'm going to do is I am going to show you the cover. I'm going to show it to you right now. Okay, isn't it cool? I love it. Now that you've seen it, let's talk about how I got there and all of the steps that we went through. So we started with figuring out all of the market research. What's working, what's not. I went through and I looked at what was popular, what wasn't, in different platforms. So like what's popular right now in Amazon is different than what's popular in Kobo, is different than what's popular at Barnes & Noble, is different than what's popular at Google Play. The point of that, if you'll remember, is that we want to find something that is going to fit well in wherever we're planning on publishing. So if you plan to only publish on Amazon, that is the only place your market research is going to apply. I plan on publishing wide. My book is going to be in as many places as I can get it. So that means that I made sure to research multiple platforms. In the live stream I did, which had some grace in that live stream. It was my first live stream. I was very much struggling technologically in that live stream, but we got through it. So on that live stream, I went through and showed you specifically Amazon, Kobo, and I think Barnes & Noble. I think those were the three I did. What I was looking for as I was doing that was getting a good feel for what was popular, what was working, and trying to get a sense of what would work in all areas. The next thing was that I went through and I figured out what elements from my story would work well on the cover to give the experience of my story. Because remember, a cover is selling an experience. A cover is not telling a story. We are not illustrating your story when we design your cover. We are selling an experience. We want to help the reader look at it and say, oh, I know what I'm getting here. And that is part of why I shifted a little bit on what I initially thought my cover was going to look like. And I shifted much further into an illustrated design because my book has a lot of humor in it and relies heavily on that comedy. And I wanted to make sure that that came through in the cover. I didn't want anyone to look at it and think that they were getting an epic fantasy level of fantasy. I wanted to make sure that it was obvious to the reader that they were getting something fun as opposed to something that was going to lead them into a 5-book or 10-book series. I didn't want to give that feeling. And that's what's really popular right now. Those covers that say, hey, we're going to follow this situation for the next 5 or 6 books and there's going to be epic fantasy and all that. A lot of the covers speak to that in their romantasy covers. So I still wanted to be romantasy, but I wanted to make it very clear that I'm not writing high fantasy or epic fantasy by any stretch of the imagination. That is not what we're doing. I'm writing romances that happen to take place in fantasy settings. So after I had gone through and figured out what elements were going to convey that experience and what styles were going to convey that experience, then I started going through and mocking things up. So you'll remember we had the composition episode where I showed you all the different compositions, and this was the one I chose to move forward with. And we talked about the different ways to sketch out a cover, and I showed it to you in stick figure, if you remember. And that's a really great way to start. If you're not someone who feels like you can draw people, don't draw people, draw stick figures so that it gets the idea across. After that, we went through and chose colors. I chose my colors, and we're going to talk about this, but when you choose colors, always remember that the colors you choose, first make sure that you know their psychology, because that's really important, and what happens when you mix colors together, what that psychology is as well. And be willing to change. And you can see why in the final product of the cover compared to the colors that I chose in the last video. So we did market research, we have our elements, we have our composition, we have our colors, and then it was time to dive in and actually start designing. I did not record this, and I didn't record it on purpose because there are so many videos on YouTube right now of designers creating covers, and they're usually sped up. And if they're not sped up, they're epically boring because it is not a fun process to sit there and watch somebody mess around in a program as they try this thing and try that thing and try this thing and try that thing. I love design and I don't want to watch that. So I didn't record it. If you want to watch somebody create a cover, Get Covers YouTube channel, GETCOVERS, they have dozens, maybe dozens upon dozens of videos. They might be close to 100 videos at this point of designing covers, and a whole bunch of them are shorts. So if that's what you're interested in, I will send you to them or to any number of the other authors that I know that actually record themselves designing their cover. One of the things that I realized as I went through working on designing this cover, the first was that the font I chose the first time ended up being really difficult to read at thumbnail size, which I should have checked first thing. I didn't think to, but I should have checked it first thing. The second thing I realized as I was designing my cover was that the colors I had chosen needed to shift. As you design more, you start to get a feel for when a design needs something specific. And this cover was one of those things. As I was designing this cover, I started to realize, you know what? No, this is not an analogous color scheme cover. This is almost a monochromatic cover. And that's what I ended up doing. It's technically still analogous because I did use a different hue of blue to get my darkest blue, and I used a teal to get all of my lighter colors. So it's technically still analogous, but when you look at it, your eye is easily deceived into thinking it is monochromatic. And that was something that as I was designing it, the more I designed it, the more I realized that's what was going on, was that I had too much color and I needed to scale back to making it almost just one color. So I want to show you some of the iterations that I went through. This first one that's up on the screen, this one was playing around with different backgrounds. If you remember the sketch, I had actually put a scene together with a night sky and the moon and the stars, and I decided very quickly that that wasn't going to work. As I illustrated the couple and as I illustrated the snake, I realized that it was going to be very busy if I did that. So I took a step back and thought about what I might want as the background, and this first one was very plain. It just has those little spirals. I meant for them to look like waves. Didn't quite come across that way. And while I liked the simplicity of it, it wasn't the feeling I wanted. So the next thing I did was I drew waves in. I illustrated waves in. And as I illustrated those waves in, I realized I really liked them. I thought they were pretty. And I tried really hard to make them work. And this was one of the lessons I learned, is that I haven't done a lot of design for myself personally. Most of my design work has been for other people, and it's a heck of a lot easier to design for other people because you're not involved, you're not invested in any of it. It's creating a product for another person. They give you the specifications, you create the product, you tweak, you create the product, you tweak the product, you go back and forth a couple times, and then you have a finished product, and you move on to the next client. When it's your own thing, it's easy to fall in love with something that doesn't work. And as you can see, I'm going to pop them up on the screen. There were a lot of iterations of this wave pattern that did not work. And I kept trying to shift it. And I was like, well, maybe the colors are the problem. And so I'd shift all the colors. And in the end, I finally had to accept that the problem was the waves that I liked so much, that I had spent so much time creating. And I had to let it go. And this was a good lesson. It was a good lesson to look at it and say, oh, I don't need this. So the next thing I shifted to was real waves. So I went through stock photos of the sea, of wave patterns. and did a bitmap trace, which is design speak for I created a vector out of an image. And after tweaking that and playing with opacities and color backgrounds, I finally settled on this one. So the number one lesson I took from all of this was to be very aware that I can get attached to something that does not work in my own designs, for me personally, which I have less of a tendency to do for clients, probably because I know the client's in charge and I don't have to worry about it. I did want to talk about font because, like I said before, I had chosen a font originally, and the way I had chosen this font, I know the names for this book and the next 3 books in this series. And so I went through and I used the fonts I had and I wrote out the name of every single book in the fonts to try and figure out which one I liked better, what was going to work across the whole series, because this will be the font for the whole series. And I'm going to throw the original back up here. If you look at it, I realized that it looked really good in the other titles, but these S's are L's or D's or something. And then when I shrunk it down to a thumbnail size, it was impossible to read. It was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I was sad because I really like how this font looks in the other titles. One of them especially just looked gorgeous and was legible, but this one wasn't. And this was another example of being too invested in my own work because it's for me, as opposed to being able to take that proverbial step back and look at it and say, this doesn't work. This is where asking for help from other people can be invaluable. But please be careful who you ask for help. I have seen really bad advice be given to authors for their covers. Really, really bad advice. And so when you're choosing who to ask for help, know who you're asking. A reader is a good person to ask. Someone who you know reads in your genre and spends a lot of time there, because that person is going to be able to look at your book cover and say, oh yeah, I could totally see that on the shelf. I could totally see that in my scrolling on Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, take your pick. It's not great to get advice from someone who knows nothing about your genre. Getting advice on a cover for, let's say, a romance novel from somebody who only reads and writes sci-fi is a bad idea, and vice versa. So just be aware. Getting feedback is super important if you're designing your own cover, but make sure that whoever you're getting that feedback from actually knows what they're talking about. Other authors can sometimes be helpful and other times not. And a lot of it is just hit and miss. So if you are thinking about designing your own cover, start finding places or people now, before you ever start designing, that you can trust to give you honest and helpful feedback. Because it is not helpful for someone to tell you to break your genre conventions. You have to make sure that whoever is giving you advice is someone who knows a thing or two about design and has designed in your genre or is very familiar with your genre. And if they're a reader, then that shifts a little bit. Because if they're a reader in your genre, they can at least look at it and say, oh yeah, I've seen covers kind of like that. Or I like your take on it because it reminds me of this author and this author's covers. That's really good feedback. Those kind of comments make a huge difference in giving you direction to move forward. But definitely be cautious, because every writers group says, oh yeah, put your cover in here and we'll give you feedback. And I have seen some authors walk away with awful feedback. And oftentimes they don't know who to listen to. So if someone with actual design expertise walks in and says, you should probably change this, this, and this because of this, this, and this, and 3 or 4 other people disagree with that person who knows what they're talking about, then the author thinks, well, these 4 people thought this other person was wrong, so I'm going to go with these 4 people, and they walk out with an amateur looking cover. It's sad and it's unfortunate. There are places you can find me. I'm in the Fictionary Circle community. You can tag me in there. I'm currently in Dale L. Roberts' Discord group, and you can find him on YouTube and get his Discord group from his YouTube channel. I'm currently in there. You can tag me. I'm always happy to offer feedback that way in those places. Just be very, very cautious of who you're accepting feedback from. That has probably been the number one thing that I've realized over the last month as I've been in certain places and watched people give design feedback on covers. It's been disheartening at certain points because I know that me stepping into that conversation oftentimes doesn't produce anything. All it does is produce an argument. And I don't want to create an argument because online has plenty of arguments. But just be very aware. Watch these videos. Make sure that you understand design principles so that if someone tells you to do something, you can go back to the book. If someone says, oh, you should put these 2 colors together, you can go back and say, actually, I understand color theory and I know those 2 colors aren't going to work. And that's why I'm not doing it. Or you could say, I understand typography and I'm not going to use this font, or I'm going to shift away from this font because I know this isn't going to work. It's important that you go into those forums when you ask for feedback armed with knowledge, because a lot of the time you're going to get feedback that's going to steer you in the wrong direction. So all of that to say, please get feedback, but please be careful. Please be aware of who you're getting feedback from. The same way that you can get poor feedback from a beta reader or from a critique group, you can most certainly get poor feedback from someone who's trying to help you with your cover. So this is the end of this little mini series. And I realized I didn't do a video on typography, and I didn't do it on purpose. Typography is so specific to genre. Composition, you can find the same composition across any genre, and you can find similar color schemes across any genre. Typography really is genre by genre based. So for that one, I am going to tell you that Google is a good friend. And you can Google fonts that work well for specific genres. And while you're looking at those fonts, make sure that you go back and watch those typography videos that I did on the basics of typography and how to apply it. Because it does need to be legible. You do need to be able to read it at thumbnail size. And your market research is another good place to make sure that you're paying attention to what typefaces are being used. So that's why there wasn't a typography video specifically, because to do a typography video, I would have had to have done a typography video for every single genre in order to help you really understand choosing that. And the best way to learn typography, unfortunately, is to just do it. Go in while you're doing your market research and pay attention to what fonts are being used on covers, see how they're similar, see how they're different, and then find fonts that fit that same tone and fit that same genre convention as you're looking through it. So moving forward, I'm going to spend most of these videos talking about how to add specific elements to your cover. So like if you want to add depth, or if you want to know how to make your cover pop in certain ways. We'll also be looking at different covers as I go through and find them that illustrate different design principles really well, so that we can kind of deep dive into it and say, oh, I know how to add flourishes now, or I know how to create depth using layering now, that kind of thing. So if there are covers that you would like me to talk about and point out what they're doing well, I would love for you to tell me down in the comments, and we're going to start doing that. That's one of the things that I'm doing for 2024 I'm really excited about. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps other authors to find it. And if you don't want to miss out on all of the cool videos I have planned for this year on cover design, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I post videos on Wednesday about cover design, discovery writing, and self-publishing on a shoestring budget. I hope to see you again soon.